Welcome back to the Info Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Guimarin. Today, we are joined by Renee. Renee is a mom and a parent, a project manager, and all-around cool person that I've had the opportunity to meet recently. And on today's conversation, I wanted to talk about Renee's experience dealing with people with autism or people who are neurodivergent, or we'll get into it here in a second, and how we can extract lessons and tools and understandings from Renee's experience so that we can apply them to other people in the info environment, right? So we have this overwhelming information environment and it's causing a bunch of behaviors in people. And I think that looking at the way that Renee and others approach neurodiversity and then extracting something out of that, that will be helpful in dealing with other people. So that's why I wanted to have Renee on. Welcome, Renee. That was a longer than usual bio. Is there anything that you want to add or that I forget or messed up?
Awesome. No, thank you, Michael, for having me on the show. I'm excited to just speak to everyone about this. This is something that's been, a passion project of mine for a really long time. I'm in the works of getting my own podcast up and running. And so these are topics that people are coming to me on a regular basis that I'm really helping answer questions on a one-on-one basis. And having a podcast is really a great tool for me to be able to just get this information out there on a broader scale.
Okay, so the first place that I'm going to go on mute because I have kids and all that. The first place that I wanted to start was the understanding of what autism is, and the number of people that have it has radically changed, I would say, over the past 5 decades. And I'm curious, and I would say, it's sort of in a not analogous way, but in somewhat of an analogous way, it's kind of like our perception of people who are gender non-conforming, right? Like homosexuals. It's like there's more awareness now because we have a term. And so are there more homosexuals than there were 100 years ago or not? And I want to start there with autism because I think everybody has come in contact with or is themselves someone who's autistic. And so I wanted to say, like, are the rates of autism increasing? Like, what's the story there?
Oh my gosh, that's a huge one. Yeah, I hear a lot of different subjects around that, that the reason that the numbers are higher is, because that the awareness is out there, that the diagnostic, the DSM, how we are creating awareness around, especially in the school system, when they see a child that is struggling and, getting help for that child, that there are a lot more students or children that are getting diagnosed now than were ever before. I do believe that that's sort of a twofold reason. I do believe that one, yes, the awareness, the diagnosing of children, the numbers are increasing in that area. But the other part of that is the number of children that are being diagnosed is increasing as well. And we're trying to figure out why. Nobody has the cause of autism yet. No one knows the answer to that. We do have a lot. I've done a lot of research on, what they are thinking the causes might be, or different things that are contributing to the rates of autism right now. And one of those can be environmental toxins and what we're putting in our bodies and the chemicals in our foods. And there's just a lot that's around that. And a lot of the studies that I've read, it comes down a lot to the microbiome. There's a lot of research into the microbiome and the gut bacteria and the health of the gut and what that is doing for, overall health, but also mental health and the gut-brain barrier.
Fascinating. So let's help for an order of magnitude. Is it when you say that we're increasing the number of so one, we're getting better at diagnosing. That's fantastic. Two, we're increasing the number. Are we talking about a 2x increase over 100 years or a 10x increase, or is there any kind of trajectory on that?
I wish I could quote the statistic accurately. I believe, we are now in 1 in 44, and it's even higher rate in males.
Okay. And then just to sort of signpost, You said two things there that were really interesting. Number one was, is there an environmental concern? And when I think of environmental concern, there's two things that really stand out to me in the 20th century. The first is pharmacology. So we have done all of this research and intervention in humans with all kinds of drugs, and then they seep into the water. So that would be like one area. And then the other area with ingestion would be sort of industrial food with the seed oils, right? And maybe what's the combination thereof. And you said something very interesting is that you said that, you know, as our understanding of the microbiome evolves and the connection in the sort of mind, gut, body axis, if you will, that there is a component of autism that may be contributed from the particular kind of microbiome. And so that would indicate that something like globalization or an increase in the consolidation of our microbiomes might also be contributing. And of course, it could be all three because it's a complex system. And ultimately, what is autism? Because there's different sort of definitions across the spectrum, if you will, which I also think, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, is not really the right way to think about it. But yeah, like that's really fascinating about the microbiome.
Yeah. So one of the studies that is out there, and, you know, forgive me if I don't quote it perfectly, I'm not a scientist. And who knew this is the direction the podcast was going to go, but there is a lot of science around fecal transplant in autism. And so what they're finding is if they can take the good gut bacteria, the microbiome, from that of a healthy individual that is not showing signs of autism or autistic behaviors, however you want to word it, you can take the gut microbiome from a healthy individual and transplant it into that person that has the autistic traits, and that person gets healed. You know, using the term cured in the autism community is a very no word. It's just another
Well, yeah.
go on a whole tangent on that.
Yeah. No, I actually appreciate that. I think where we're trajectory is, something happens in the environment which is causing more people to have autism over time. And what you just suggested, and of course, autism and any mental condition is, because the brain is neuroplastic, it can be reinforced through time. So for example, if a child receives a fecal transplant at 18 months to sort of retard their autism, that was purposeful, versus at say 7 or 8 years, I would anticipate that the effectiveness of the treatment in isolation would be different, because the brain patterns have had so much longer to evolve for that 7-year-old than they have for that 18-month-old. That is really fascinating. So I wouldn't tell people like, hey, we're going to give you this pill or you're going to do this procedure and you're going to cure autism. It's more like, yeah, that's really interesting, because then that also suggests that there's something that disturbs the microbiome in children, right? Maybe it's actually children who are being cesarean birthed, right? So they're not getting the same microbiome as a natural thing. If you think about like the incidence of cesarean births going up through time, and then the incidence of autism is going up through time, that would be sort of like a very, very simple thing. But I guess you could also look at other things like pharmacology and seed oils and all this kind of stuff as well. So fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's all those things, right? For me, my two births were cesarean births. We have 2 children on the spectrum, or neurodivergent, however you want to say it. One, and what you said is exactly true. One was diagnosed at the age of 16. The other was diagnosed at the age of 21. And I think
you're talking about months or years.
21 months and 23 years. Yeah. Or sorry, he's 23 years old now. He was diagnosed at 16. So the difference between that, you know, my son, who's now 8, was diagnosed at 21 months, and our son that's now 23, that was diagnosed at 16 years. You gain all of these, say, negative coping strategies for this, call it a disability or however you want to word it, for this impairment that you have, that you've created all of these coping strategies for something that you didn't know that you're doing the best that you can. And the difference between, his abilities and that of my 8-year-old, who has had, treatments through biomedical healing, treatments through behavior therapies, occupational therapies, physical therapy, speech therapy. We've done everything with him since he was 21 months old when we had him diagnosed. Had our older son had those things, we'd be in a very different place. So to speak to that, can you cure autism? It's not necessarily, and I hate that term too, because a lot of people get really offended by, autism is a part of who they are. And if you take away the autism, you take away the person they are. And I really want to combat that, or take people, or ask people to pause when they think that way, because if you felt that somebody was struggling with something, and it's not necessarily inherently their personality, it's something that they were struggling with. If it were, say, a medical disorder, and you could rid them of that thing to make their life better, wouldn't you do it?
Right. It's kind of like what you're saying, just to make it really extreme, is you have someone who's a quadriplegic, and because they're a quadriplegic, they make choices and they construct their identity that is in a particular way. And then science comes in with an intervention and makes them no longer quadriplegic, right? Like, are they really the same person? Or you could say polio is, unfortunately, last century, that was something that couldn't be cured. But if you had polio as a child and it was very debilitating, and then at some point in your adulthood it was cured, is that part of your identity? I think we can be sensitive to understanding this sort of ship of Theseus argument, if you will, and that you can look at it as, helping to someone be the best version of themselves by sort of removing those negative expressions. So actually, that's if that's okay, what I just said, I'd love to talk about the negative expressions and and strategies for dealing with them.
Absolutely. So where do you want to dive in?
Well, where do you think that we should dive in? So the reason why I am interested in this topic, other than obviously, you could say I'm neurodivergent or high functioning or whatever you want to say on the autism spectrum, is because what I have observed in the information environment is that when people consume information of a certain kind, they become more feral, and they lose so much of their ability to focus, so much of their ability to manage their emotions, so much of their ability to act in a socially responsible way, right? It's like they've been trained or entrained such that if you say key words, they attack like an animal. I lived in San Francisco, so if you talked about Trump from 2017 to 2020, you could watch people's brains melt down in real time. And what I found interesting about this is that a lot of times it's compassion for these people and empathy and understanding about where they're coming from, and managing them to an extent, that relationship, like you would manage someone who's neurodivergent. Like, to me, that was potentially something worth exploring. So like that's sort of where my interest comes. But, I wouldn't say expert, because I don't like to label people experts, but as the expert, Renee, I'm interested, like, am I thinking about this the wrong way? Is it inappropriate to compare people who are entrained with, QAnon syndrome or TDS with people who are autistic? I'm sort of interested in what your perspective is on that.
Sure. I think one of the biggest questions is, like, what is autism? Like, do you really know? Unless obviously you're saying that you feel like you fall somewhere on the spectrum as a high functioning person with autism. But I think that when most people think autism, they think only the most severe of people that are on the spectrum. So they think of the people that are rocking in the corner or spinning with self-stimulating behaviors. And because autism is such a wide spectrum, and now we're using more the term of neurodivergent or neurodiversity, there's no one, autism. It's very varied person to person. And, we briefly had this conversation about, the term even high functioning. What makes a person high functioning? What classifies a person on the spectrum as high functioning? Well, most people would tell you that high functioning means that, you know, they're potty trained and they can talk, because a low functioning person on the autism spectrum is a person that can't do those abilities. But I can tell you from my own experience that even the highest functioning, most intelligent person has low functioning days where their autism or anxiety or, you know, whatever, it is debilitating, where they can't function, they can't even get out of bed, when they're so in their caveman brain that they are acting like an animal and not like a human being. And there are times when that happens, when they are not in control, when their, you know, prefrontal cortex just completely shuts off, and you're no longer dealing with them as if they're a human, that they're in flight, fight, or freeze.
Yeah. Well, it's you just said the exact same thing. It's like what I'm seeing in the information environment is the exact same thing. Like, we're not calling it that, and maybe it's not appropriate to, but you're absolutely right. People are in this situation where if you key them into a particular topic, it's fight, flight, or freeze. So what are we supposed to do? Like, is there a process of sort of recognition,
Sure.
intervention? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I'll give you a great example of a recent event that literally just happened on my anniversary. So we were going out for our anniversary. Having kids with special needs is challenging, and it's not always easy to get someone to watch our kids. The only person that we trust to watch our children, both of them at the same time, because we have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old. She's in Connecticut because that's originally where we're from, and so she's 4.5 hours away. So getting a babysitter when your child has special needs, you know, it's not always just an option. So it was a Tuesday night. We were going to go out for dinner, for our anniversary dinner. We're bringing both kids along. So, you know, can you even count that as an anniversary dinner when you're bringing both your kids? But that's our life. That's what life looks like when you have a child with special needs. Like, you don't get a vacation from that because it's a special day. And so, you know, we go out to dinner all the time. This isn't a new thing for my son. He's very good in a restaurant. Typically, he doesn't get overwhelmed typically with the stimulus of the noise and the busyness of a restaurant. But for whatever reason, this day we go in, we sit down, and he's having a hard time regulating, whether, you know, who knows what it was that day. And so something set him off, and he starts screaming at the top of his lungs in the middle of the restaurant. You know, we can use, I've been doing this for a long time. You know, we're now on 6 years, and I know a lot of the strategies to help him calm down, the deep breathing, you know, and I wasn't going to get him under control in a reasonable amount of time to be in the middle of a restaurant. Everybody's looking at us like, what is going on? Why is this kid screaming? And so I made the choice to pick him up and get him out of the area, you know, out of the space, because I know that if I get him out of the space, I can calm him down. I can bring him back from his caveman brain to his, you know, bring his prefrontal cortex back online and get him back in control in his body. And so that's what I'm doing. So I'm picking up my 8-year-old. You know, I'm not a very big woman. I'm 5'3", 100 pounds, you know, carrying this flailing, screaming, trying to put his hands around my throat, trying to choke me, screaming, you know, nearly 50-pound child through the restaurant. My husband's then collecting our toddler that's 2, on all of the things that, you know, we brought with us, diaper bag, etc., as we're like exiting this building as soon as possible. And one of the things that I also, just a side note, want to say is, if you ever see a parent doing that, give them grace. We do not need your judgmental looks when we're going through that. And I'm the type of person, it does not bother me anymore. I could care less what people think. Like, they don't live my life. They're not they're not walking in my shoes. I could care less. But in any case,
No, I completely agree with you. As a parent now, I have a lot more empathy, right? And like, it goes the other way too, where I don't trust people that don't have children as much, because I don't feel like they have a stake in the next generation. And so I'm not interested in them politically or in leadership positions. And I agree with you that, like, when my kid is screaming in a public place and I'm trying to do my best, it would be nice if some people showed grace, especially early on when I was first a parent, excuse me. when that was a difficult transition to make, right? And I completely understand people who don't have children as well, who are like, oh my God, can't these breeders stop with their kids? So what I took away from that was your son started to have a meltdown. And apologies if that's not the correct term.
No, that's absolutely the right term.
He basically had a meltdown, and the strategy was to isolate him from the social setting and bring him back to a one-on-one relationship where you could reconnect with him as an individual. You said reactivate his prefrontal cortex. And I think that is very interesting from an information environment standpoint, because we do come across, like you mentioned that you're 100 pounds and that your son is 50 pounds. Obviously, when my uncle is losing it because somehow politics came up in the conversation, I'm not going to be able to pick him up physically easily, right? And take him outside. But this idea that, hey, let's not make this performative in front of a group, and let's one-on-one and then see if we can mirror. So like one of the things I'm curious if you do with your son would be, you mentioned deep breaths. Do you start taking deep breaths so that he starts taking deep breaths? Okay, so you start basically projecting a mirror, right? So we mirror automatically, and if you do that and have an essence of calmness, and that will spread to him because he will latch onto that in a one-on-one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can break down exactly. Yeah, so the first thing was, yes, take him out of the environment, because the noise, just the busyness of the restaurant, is sometimes even, children on the spectrum, they're sensitive to the lighting. Who knows? My son can hear things that we cannot hear, like, in all seriousness. So it could have been any number of things that were setting him off. So physically removed him from the location, so that we could be outside. That's gonna reset. I do the exact same thing that you were talking about, taking deep breaths with him. So typically he is small enough, I obviously still can carry him. So he also is very sensory seeking. So he likes to seek pressure. So even just the act of me physically carrying him is giving him some pressure and some input that he needs in his body to feel secure, to feel safe. So that helps him calm. So sometimes if he's having like a meltdown at home, or I can tell like he's very fidgety, I will wrap him in a compression blanket to give him that input that he needs. There's just something in his body that needs that input. So that was another piece of it, is giving him that input. And then, like you mentioned, the slowing down the breaths, just by doing it yourself, he will start to, because automatically your body will calm when you take deep breaths. I mean, everybody in meditation teaches you that. There's a reason for it. It does, in fact, calm the body. So if I start taking the deep breaths, he'll start taking the deep breaths, and then he's going to basically come back into his body, and that's how we get him back, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I want to pause right here and talk about this causal relationship between the actions that we're taking and our state of mind, just to reinforce what Renee said, because I think, first of all, if you get emotionally triggered about anything, and it's not even that you're dealing with somebody else who's had a meltdown or whatever is upset, this idea that you have agency over the physical actions that your body is taking and that you can affect your mind, it's a really significant and powerful idea. So even if I'm driving on the road and somebody cuts me off and I don't want to cycle into some kind of road rage, just taking a few deep breaths, like reminding myself, okay, I got to stop and take some deep breaths, is going to be helpful. And then to sort of reinforce this point, I wanted to talk about why people get nightmares. So a lot of people, like our brains fire in sort of a very interesting way at night. It has to do with shifting memory from short-term to long-term memory and sort of maintaining long-term memory. You could think of it like garbage collection in a computer science way. And the things that are firing are random. They're not narratively driven. The narrative we create upon waking up. And so there's this idea that we have nightmares, but nightmares is actually a function of the temperature in your bed, like 95% of the time, as opposed to some actually traumatic thing that your brain is processing. And so you'll get people who wake up in a cold sweat and they say, oh, I had a nightmare. Well, the reason why they had a nightmare is because they were hot and sweating. And so their brain made that story to describe how that was physically feeling. And it's the same in this case. And so if your brain starts going off on a tangent or getting upset, then if you can make yourself physically more calm by heavy breathing, or what Renee said was a compression blanket, right? So some people use fidgeting. It's kind of difficult in my uncle example to put a compression blanket on your uncle because they're getting upset. But you could think about that like, okay, most men don't ever get physical touch. We're seeing more and more people are having these sort of meltdowns in public over things that they've been triggered from on the internet. And part of it is that as a lack of touch. So should we, naturally be hugging people more at the beginning and the ending of our in-person interactions, right? Like that's actually a real palpable thing for this that Renee's saying. But I wanted to illustrate that, yeah, it's so weird that changing the body physically changes the body mentally. It's like not what you would think. You would think it'd be like, okay, I'm going to calm myself down in my brain and then my body's going to become calm. And it's like, no, it's actually the opposite.
Very much so. Yeah. And changing the state. I mean, that's something that obviously Tony Robbins talks about all the time is, to change your state, his changing your state is physically getting up and down and moving your body. But you do have control of these things, and you're not powerless against, your mind. You do have ways that you can, change your thoughts, change your state. If, you're finding that you're falling into a depression or cycling thoughts, or, there are things that you have the power to do, and it's just learning the strategies to be able to do them.
Cool. So I want to talk about two more things, and we still have a few minutes, and you can choose which direction, or maybe we don't talk about them. The first is pharmacological intervention. So do you think taking drugs for autism or associated neurodivergent disorders is a good thing? And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is, what are some interventions that we can have with our autistic children or people in our lives who are sort of losing it before they tip over into a full-on meltdown? So I'm sure that there are some signs for you as a mom with at least two neurodivergent children that you're like, okay, there's things are happening. What are the interventions we can do before? So two things: drugs, and then what can we do before sort of a meltdown happens?
Ooh, that is a great question. And so I am of the mindset that drugs are an absolute last resort. We will try everything else first. I'm a very natural homeopathic type of person where we heal with food. And so that is the general direction that we have gone with both of our boys.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, I will say that one of our boys is on medication, and it was hugely helpful. And I wished that I had done it sooner. So I do think that it can go both ways. And I think it's really specific to the individual. In most cases, I'm pretty anti-pharm, pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
I would much rather heal the microbiome first. Let's talk about, getting, doing a test. Where's the gut bacteria? Is it overrun with bad bacteria? Is there a yeast overgrowth? One of the things that we do is omegas. Omegas are great for brains, brain health. So we're going to do the things that are going to help naturally. One of the things, and this is a very controversial one as well, that we did that helped a ton with our youngest when he was first being diagnosed, and this was before he was even speaking. We did camel's milk, raw camel's milk, getting all of that really good gut bacteria from the raw.
Why is that controversial? It's what's different between camel's milk and and milk, like cow's milk.
Raw milk and camel's milk. Okay, so there's sort of two different parts to this. Because it was helping so many. I'm like, how do I word this so that it's
well, because like, I don't know. To me, it's like, okay, raw milk. We have raw things. Humans have been drinking milk from goats and cows, as far as I can recall in literature, and I'm sure it's the same with camels. So why is that controversial? It shouldn't be controversial. It
shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be. So okay, I'll say it two different ways. One, raw milk. People have died from raw milk. That's one of the reasons we pasteurize milk.
Yeah, but people have died from everything, right? Because there's a lot of people.
Yes. And then, government comes in and controls it. And now all of our milk is pasteurized, which is killing the good bacteria in the milk. So that's one way that you could say it. And camel's milk, I don't understand exactly, but we were getting frozen raw camel's milk from California, of all places. And then they.
What do you mean? California is totally known for having herds of camels.
Right? Yeah. But so then it became, say, controversial, and they couldn't ship it over the state borders. So we're fortunate. We actually here.
Oh my God! Did you bootleg it?
No. We are near Lancaster County, and because Lancaster is very holistic, Amish, natural farms, we have an Amish farm that has camels, and we buy our raw camel's milk from a farm in Lancaster.
I like it.
So
you went to
California camels.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Local. Shop local, right?
So yeah, we're getting local camel's milk. But just to go back on the camel's milk, when we first got started with the camel's milk, my son's gut was so messed up that he went from being what they call a nonverbal child that was not speaking at 3 years old to having over 100 words in 2 months. Just adding camel's milk. Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in biomedical, functional medicine, integrative medicine, whatever term you want to call it, but using natural things from the earth to balance out the imbalances in your body. So we've done a lot of different things over the years. We do camel's milk, we do vitamin D, we also have MTHFR, which is just a gene variant that means that we don't process folate properly. So we have to take a folate supplement, different things like that. So basically I look for a doctor that's going to look at the whole person and not just the symptom, and treat the source of the problem and not just the symptom. So if you were to sum up like what I believe in a nutshell, that would be it.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between managing a acute reactive problem and trying to build proactively towards health, right? So there's no in principle, if like, this is kind of, maybe it's an extreme position, but I don't think so. You don't need to wait until your son is nonverbal autistic to try out the benefits of camel's milk. That would be like,
absolutely,
like the best way that I could put that, right? And so
what is the harm in doing it, really?
Exactly,
That's
right? You're like, you look at the intervention that you did and how effective it was. Why wouldn't you do that intervention before you necessarily have an issue, right? And then I also really liked what you were saying about turning to pharmacology, or sort of like manufactured chemicals last. You could say camel's milk is manufactured, but I think you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And that's because I personally feel like it's a complex system at the point where we don't know the impact. So you gave an anecdote, which is basically you changed your son's microbiome, and almost impossibly soon he was fully verbal, right? So like that to me is like incontrovertible evidence that there was something going on there at a fundamental microorganism level, right? Like there was something going on with his bacteria and his body such that it was inhibiting proper functioning. And so this idea that's a complex system because we don't understand it. Now I understand there's people that are trying to tease apart and trying to say all these interventions, but I think it's inappropriate to say that we understand it. So I think at this point I would call it a complex system. And so introducing a manufactured substance that's psychoactive, which most chemicals that we put in, like most drugs are psychoactive, I think is not a good thing. And then to your point, there are situations where for whatever reason, the physical neural pathways have been reinforced so many times that a psychoactive compound is going to be effective. And that is probably the experience that you're having with your other son. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's also really good. Oh, I love it. I'd love this answer to pharmacology, which is basically like be holistically healthy and be proactive about your health. And that will help solve a lot of downstream problems that manifest. That's
absolutely. I mean, there were so many things. A lot of parents that I hear that are having challenges with aggression with, children that are on the autism spectrum. A lot of that is because of yeast overgrowth. Yeast overgrowth causes aggression.
Now,
And
help me understand that for a second, because I am not as good on the science there. Like, how do people get a yeast overgrowth?
well, we live on way too much sugar,
Yeah.
and yeast feeds on sugar.
And
So
so is the yeast in our intestine, or?
yeah, so think of it like think of yeast as the bad bacteria. You get a bad bacteria overgrowth in your
Yeah.
gut, where
Yeah.
the bad guys out there's more of the bad guys than the good guys, and that's a lot of what we have been fighting in my son for 6 years, and I would even say we're still fighting. So, and you talked about the evidence of the camel's milk. I agree. I mean, like, how could it be anything else? We hadn't changed anything else. He had been going to speech therapy for years. You know, like, that was the only thing that changed. How could it be anything
It's
else?
so crazy on a dollar per intervention basis too, because speech therapy is labor. You're probably paying $100 an hour or something like that for years, and then you go
Mhm.
and you do something for $20, and it changes instantly. I mean, it's
Oh
an
yeah,
incredible.
it was a huge difference. But we do have the tests. We do know the difference because we do test his microbiome. We know what bacteria he has. We know, you know, that he has more good than or bad than good, and you know, so we're introducing probiotics, and we're doing different strains of bacteria to help with that balance. And I can see the shifts. I can see the changes when we do the different interventions. So, you know, some things help and some things, you know, we don't necessarily see any difference. But how we look at things is like, if there is no harm, like if we're doing no harm, like if I'm giving him milk and it doesn't hurt him and it could help him, then why not? Why not
Yeah.
do it?
Yeah. Why not do the experiment? So at this point, do you not allow is your son on a gluten-free diet, basically,
Oh,
or
absolutely. Yeah, we didn't get into that much on this podcast, but yes, my number one tip for anyone if they just received diagnosis for their child is go gluten free, go dairy free, and that will make a radical difference.
Isn't this crazy? Because, like, let's extend this out to people who are having trouble in the information environment. What you're saying is that food triggers your autistic child. It probably also triggers everyone.
Oh my God, yes.
And
I mean,
so
this
if everybody,
thrives
like,
out of your diet. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And so you see people who are having a lot of trouble, who are on anti-anxiety medications, and they're eating a vegan diet that's just processed bread. And you're like, oh my God, of course you're having trouble. You
Oh
know?
yeah, yeah. That I mean, overall health, I mean, including mental health, comes down to what you're putting in your body. And I would say that we have a health epidemic, you know, across the United States and even, you know, Canada and other
Yeah.
countries where what we're putting in our bodies is fundamentally just not food. It's
You
not
know what I'm going
healthy.
to do? When I publish this episode, I'm going to include, my opinion, the best NIH meta study on the mental components of wheat and grains in our
Oh my
diet.
gosh, yeah. Do that
You
in
guys
the
should all check
doc.
it out. It's going to be in the comments below. Okay, so Renee, sort of one thought. This is kind of extreme, and obviously talk to your doctor. And I'm interested to hear this. Have you ever thought about doing like a full spectrum antibiotic from your son for your son, and then just sort of restarting his gut bacteria, period, to end?
So we haven't ever done a full spectrum antibiotic. We have done very targeted antibiotics to
Yeah,
help reset his gut because, like I said, he does have that overgrowth of the bad bacteria. So yes, we have done those things, and I can't even. I literally have boxes of probiotics of the
yeah.
different strains of bacteria. So we are very regimented. We change up our probiotics so he's getting different strains to rebuild his gut to be a healthy, functioning gut.
Very interesting. Yeah, there was a company that I was aware of recently that had a big intervention here too. I think this is an interesting area for science, and I'm definitely curious how it evolves. And we'll have to get you back on here in a few months to see if, because it's evolving quickly, actually. All right, let's go out with some interventions that you think people can use, not necessarily for just neurodivergent children, but like basically, what should we do before we see a meltdown? Like, we see someone trending towards being very upset. Maybe there's like a nervous tick, or they start to, I think you said sway a little bit more, or self-soothe. I think this happens with everyone all the time. much more than I think people are willing to admit. So you don't have to say that the person has autism. I get it. There's a stigma there for some people. But Renee, what are some strategies that people use like before we have like a total meltdown? I have to take my child out of the store.
Sure. I think it's really individual, because for what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So physical activity, like if you see that they're getting really antsy, having them go for a walk might help relieve that. For my son, physical pressure. If I see that he's very hyperactive, if I can see that he's kind of like not stopping moving, I can see, okay, he probably needs some input and he's seeking some pressure, and I can give him some pressure. Maybe just it's a big bear hug or a squeeze if I'm not home and I don't have the compression blanket. Some kids really do well with, they call it heavy work, with like, hey honey, could you help me carry this bag upstairs or this laundry basket upstairs. That heavy work kind of gives their body the input they need. So it's really sort of individual. Some people, everyone, deep breath works across the board. Deep breath works. If you're a human being, it works. Some people it's music, some calming music. Some it can be very energetic music. I think it's very different depending on the person, what sort of soothing strategies. But I definitely think that, just being mindful of others and knowing that everyone's battling something, and just be a good human, like really. I think that that's really the first step, right? And just being more understanding of others.
Yeah, I think that's really good. When you were talking, I was thinking, okay, so everyone needs to eat a healthy, whole food diet. They need to be considerate of their mental and emotional state. They need to weight lift heavy, right? So you're saying like it helps to like have compress. I'm like, oh, this is why all these guys are always
exercise. Absolutely, that's a huge one.
Oh, you're basically like telling all of society to do exactly what right-wing bodybuilder on Twitter is always telling everybody to do. Awesome. And then when you see it developing in a person, trying to give them some grace, I think was a word you used earlier in the episode. I think that's a really beautiful sentiment as well. Well, Renee, thank you so much for coming on. This has been really interesting and fantastic in a couple of ways for me. And I'm excited to, excited to continue the conversation and to explore more of this. How do we deal on the relationship side for the info environment?
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I was excited to be here.
Bye-bye.